Hello there, welcome back to another show. I'm going to do this week, I'm going to do Oliver Reed Week, which is different. I don't usually do a week long thing, but as I'm doing everything together in these shows, I could just do one big long show. I'm going to split it up into parts, like I'm going to stop and start each time we're going to do another subject. But as you can see behind me, I don't have a green screen behind me this week. The reason is it's really warm here. I'm putting the green screen and the lights on me, and have the lights on me, but the window open as well. So you might hear a car going by. There's not much you can do. It's just too warm. But putting the green screen up and stuff with this heat, it's just not good. So over the summer there won't be green screen. And once it cools down again, there'll be green screen again. It's just one of those things. It's just like I don't think it's a good idea to be sweltering during these videos. It's not good for me to try and do all that stuff. Okay, the reason I'm doing Oliver Reed weeks, I've been watching a lot of Oliver Reed films, and I read the biography of Oliver Reed, What Fresh Lunacy is This. So I'm actually going to start with the biography and then cover certain films. I'm going to cover The Devils. I'm going to cover The Three and Four Musketeers. I'm going to cover Assassination Bureau. It's a certain time in his life, like the mid 60s to mid 70s. Those are when the films were released. So I'm not covering stuff like The Brood, which is a terrific film, but I'm sure I'll get to Brood on its own at some point because it's a Cronenberg film. I haven't covered some of his later films either, but generally I'm going to cover what was probably his peak era, really, for films. This is when you normally find with most actors, they've either whether they've got directors who they work with who understand them and can cater to them and give them parts that suit them, and then they become like workhorses who are well-known names, but sometimes the films they get aren't as great as we like. And that's just what happens to a lot of actors. So you wonder, why did a career like not finish off the way you like it to finish off? And it's like, well, they collaborated over a certain time. The collaborations eventually ended, and that was the peak of who they could really align with, or who they could understand best of all within the film industry. Because the problem with the film industry is lots of people want to do the thing, and you have to collaborate with a lot of people to try and get some good work done. But it doesn't mean like everybody will gel with each other. There's always stories about creative differences. A lot of time that really just is people who have different ideas of what someone should be, and there's no way to kind of have them work in the same thing because their idea of what it should be is so different. And even like collaborators who had a time together, who did some good work together, eventually they move on from each other because even everyone's developing. There's certain parts that are good for a certain actor, and then when like a director develops other projects, there's other parts that aren't very good for them anymore, or they maybe just fallen out with them or had difficult relationships. So in this biography, What Fresh Lunacy is This, let's go through Oliver Reed's life. It's written by Robert Sellers, who's done quite a lot of British biographies, and it's pretty good. It's not the most amazing book out there. There's some real flaws in it. I mean, one of the big flaws I found as someone who likes films is he's not that good in films. The writer of this book is not that great in film and discussing films. Usually his idea is it was a really good film, it showed all read off well, or it wasn't. You don't get much depth beyond that, and you kind of want a bit more because we'd had an interesting career. So it's either like you cover certain films from the peak, then you cover films from the lesser period, and then you cover films from when he was taking any work you get. And when it came to any work you get, that's fine doing some very basic job, because obviously Reed was not really particularly interested in these films either. But some of the other films, like the Musketeer films or the Devils, you'd want a bit more on them, or just the Ken Russell collaborations. And you don't quite get as much as that as you like. You don't get as much in Oliver either, which was Oliver Reed's like big breakout. The Hammer stuff could have been more interesting as well from this early period. But it does. The book does go into a lot of detail as well, though. It goes into his Reed's early life, goes into him trying to make it an actor, his motivations and what he felt, and looks into his strengths and weaknesses. But it gets, even in this, it gets repetitive. It covers certain things, and then there's massive holes where there's not that much information, and it's like, so the biography was a bit bitty, is what I'm saying. It's like, it doesn't feel like it's a great biography. It feels like it's a serviceable biography with lots of good bits, but lots of bits that are just so. And it goes way too far into the Oliver drinking thing. I mean, we all knew he had a drinking problem. He drank way too much. But this gets repetitive and story after story after story. And there's a lot of stuff you can cover like in half the time and give the audience an idea of this was still going on in his life. But this book seems to love going into all the different details of all these different escapades, and it gets a bit boring after a while. And it's like, yeah, he had a problem, but it's like you get into the life of someone with a problem and then go through every detail, every little thing they did, and it's like, who cares? I bet you he wouldn't remember half this stuff and wouldn't woke up next morning. It's and it kind of it covers a lot, will not cover it in depth, is what the big thing I think went. So I started skimming through the drunken stories by the time we got into the mid 70s because they weren't actually that interesting. And you get the general idea, really, of the different states of mind Reed was in over this time period. So what the book does well is it creates a sense of why he was so screwed up, that what was up with his father. His father was a conscientious objector during World War II, which Reed really objected to. He found that a shameful thing, and it was something that would always be under his skin afterwards. It was something meant he could never really respect his own father, because Reed was thought him was a coward, and Reed was actually did his national service and did all this stuff, and he was much more of a patriot, while his father was much more sneering. His father also seemed to be a very like screwed up person himself emotionally. So his sons never really got the love they needed, or the outward signs of affection they probably needed to actually get ahead in life, and that led to a lot of anger and issues and a lot of arguments between them and the father, between them over time as well. But they never seemed, but according to the book, they never the problems between the boys themselves never ultimately became that big a deal. Ultimately, it was like they would stop speaking for a while, and then they'd eventually catch back up. So it was much more people who told the father. The mother also was someone who was not around much. She looked after Oliver when he was young, and then she kind of abandoned him basically. And she was an actress, and after that, he seemed to hate her more than he hated his father. And ultimately, it caused some issues with women over time, some trust issues, which would cause him to say things that definitely come across as misogynistic. But also, when you read the book, it definitely feels like it's caught up in something that's part of the culture of the time, part due to the fact he was when he wasn't drinking, he was notoriously shy and sensitive, and I was listening to a lot of like issues that hadn't been sorted, and if it sounded like he had good relationships with women sometimes, and then when things went wrong, it could slide back into the more misogynistic tendencies his, of his upbringing and what happened in his upbringing. It seemed like he tends to be fine going well with people, but when things went wrong, that and when you're drinking too much, that's when some of the issues come out, and issues they never really dealt with, and they were kind of thing that the culture themselves never dealt with. Because the thing about this period where he grew up is that he grew up at a time when men didn't show their feelings that much. It was meant to be you kept everything in. So there was a lot of drinking involved, and people drank a lot. And one of the things you notice about generation just before him, which is the Richard Burtons and you had the Lee Marvins, either the people who served in the war or came after the war, like Oliver Reed and Richard Burton, but they came from a damaged stock, basically, of men who had emotional issues and drank way too much, and drinking became a burden. So some of it came from war, Lee Marvin's side, but also some of it just came from the social issues, not dealing with things that were going wrong in your life. And there was a culture in theatre and film of drinking a lot, and it was a way to deal with your issues, really, because you're based a lot of time. You're a lot of men who were fairly masculine, being in an industry that was viewed as fairly feminine, really, because you're play acting, you're not a real man, but you're doing this, and that affected some actors quite badly. But the fact is that the emotional turmoil meant that the generation from the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s who were dominant during that time were very complicated macho men with sensitive sides, and who which came through the films and made really fascinating performances and great looks at the male psyche. And Oliver Reed was one of those people who showed an intelligence to himself, could take the mickey out of himself, could be sensitive. He never seemed to have a problem with sexuality or playing someone who's gay or camp or anything else. He never had that problem. And he just was part of that generation where a lot of the problems were undiagnosed, but they came through in the performances. So even like we get him in a film where he wasn't that engaged, he could still do wonderful stuff with the part because he was a professional actor who also managed to try and amuse himself sometimes. Basically, that was the thing. It was like, and a lot of actors were like that. You'd see some bizarre choices in career of actors choosing stuff that paid them well but made them miserable in the filming. And they would get drunk through most of the film. There's plenty of stories like that, and plenty of biographies of plenty of these actors where it was like I think Richard Burton made a film with Lee Marvin. It was like, who the hell put these two together in a film? It's like, are you suicidal? And then this one, Oliver Reed and Lee Marvin in a film together, where Oliver Reed actually drunk Lee Marvin under the table, which is something they always dragged for later. It was like, what mad person put these two together in a film? It wasn't even a very good film. It was just, but it was one of those things where they enjoyed themselves over there, but it wasn't a great film. So there was a lot of things there, and it was more interesting about that kind of culture of these men who had some discomfort from how they earned a living, but also they're interested in what they're doing. So one of the things that you find out that Reed was dyslexic. So it wasn't diagnosed at the time. People just thought he was thick at school. So he always had a problem with his intelligence, in the sense that he thought that he wasn't good enough to be around the smart people in the English culture, even though he was obviously very intelligent. So he's very shy about that, and when he get nervous, he would drink, and but it also meant that he would learn his lines really early before he got to the set. So it was like, how does he know all the lines when he's out drinking all the time? He was always there pitch perfect because he learned them well before he got there. And apparently he would always have like a dry week where he just learn the lines, like, don't drink, just learn these lines, keep going, learn them. And he would know what he was doing. So because he was dyslexic, he found his way around it, but it meant that because it wasn't diagnosed and he didn't realize it was actually a medical condition, it wasn't thick, it was just a medical condition. He was viewed as someone who wasn't very bright, and that kind of something that stuck with him. He also did his national service and he actually enjoyed it, but he might have done well in a career there if it wasn't for the fact his reading and writing was terrible because he's dyslexic. He was good at everything else. Everyone thought he was great at everything else, but he couldn't do that. And there was signs of darkness there when he was very tough on the recruits. When he was starting to get promoted up to train people, he was apparently very, very tough. And on sets of the films, he was a trooper, but he was also very annoyed at people who couldn't keep up with getting the film done, like getting the job done every day. And he was pretty merciless in that. It was like, because he was always there, no matter what he did, he was always there on time. Um, so he did have a work ethic that went against all the stories you heard about. So it was one of those things. As the problem with him was his nightlife and when he went too far drinking wise. But when he was on the set, apparently he was a nice guy, he was shy, he was quiet, and he got on with it. And apparently his daughter one day to set when she was like, "Why you stand around all day?" And he goes, "That's what I do for a living. That's my job. A few minutes here or there, but most of it is waiting." So he was a professional, and he did have a rise of a career because he was very good. And a lot of people, when he first started, thought he was just in it for the money because he never showed. He kept everything to himself. He didn't show his like pretentious professional pride. He was very much hated the pretentious actor and the lovely actor. He was much more treat it like a job. You go and you do it. You're good at your job, and that's it. He hated hanging around with actors. Never hanging around with actors. You only ever saw actors on the set or maybe afterwards for a bit. But he never really kept in contact with most actors. Most of his friends were working class guys who he go out drinking with and things, but it was a sense of he was someone who did not enjoy premieres or the big life. And that kind of got in his way as a career later on when he went to Hollywood. His way of fitting in was not what Hollywood liked, and they were very sensitive and they never really got far with them. And that kind of caused him problems later on because the British film industry was always like growing, collapsing. So he could rely on certain directors to hire him, like Michael Winner or Ken Russell in the 70s. But it was like when everything dried up, he had problems finding work and he'd have to take jobs in films he was interested in just because he had a family. So those films in the 70s and 80s he was not interested in. But then again, the film Bugger points out when he got a good part like and Revolver or like The Brood, he knew he was in a good part and he would actually work at it and make sure it was good because he knew when he jump on a part and actually make it his own because he knew when something was good. He also knew if he was in a trashy film to enjoy torturing the certain people. And there's a good story about him working with Klaus Kinski on Venom, and he would spend most of his time winding Klaus Kinski up because Richard a sense of humour Kinski didn't, and most of the time was spent just winding Kinski up, which sounds like fun actually. So it's an interesting biography. It gets more tragic as it goes on when his drinking won't stop and no one around him is really strong enough to say, this is not doing good for you. You need to find other ways to cope. And that was the thing. He never had anybody who was strong enough to actually stand up to him. He didn't like people standing up to him, obviously, because he was a certain generation. But no one really had the guts to. Basically, people just eventually just left and said, I've had enough of this. Rather than stand up and say, this is not good for you. You shouldn't be doing this for yourself. And they would just leave it to him to actually go on with it, which is something that he would probably notice because he was an intelligent person. He'd probably make him most cynical with people generally. So, despite all his problems, there was still a lot of really good work done. And the book does show like he was a very human person, and despite his flaws and his mistakes, most people liked him. It was like that thing is like there are a few people who didn't like him, but most people liked him. Even people who weren't very keen on him, who worked with him, always said like he was really good at his job. They weren't very keen on what he did off screen, but on screen it was like, yeah, he turned up, he knew his job, he was on target for what he needed to do. So it's a interesting biography to read. Shows you a complicated man. So I don't really like biographies who will look at subjects and just like tabloid like scathe. And this one's much more human. It's just that there's certain things it doesn't know, and there's certain things it overdoes for effect. Like the drinking is so much in it. Even though he obviously drank a lot, it feels overbalanced in the book in a sense that you could have figured it out yourself. But it's definitely an interesting story, and I was quite glad to have read it, really, even though the book itself problems. So I hope you enjoy this, and I'll be back soon with the next part of the Oliver Reed Week. Right, bye for now.